It's a miracle.
Our next story begins and ends halfway around the world, in Korea. And in between, you'll meet a remarkable family who suffered through an incredible ordeal. Their story is one which will touch your heart and prove that miracles have no geographical boundaries. In 1977, Elaine and Stephen Bauman fulfilled a lifelong dream when they adopted a 3-year-old Korean boy who they named Brian, and who instantly became a part of their family.
The night we received him from Korea, no one wanted to sleep in their own rooms. Everybody wanted to sleep around Brian. We just didn't want to miss any moment enjoying him.
As Brian grew, he became a very serious, goal-oriented young man.
When he was 9 years old, he informed us he was going to be an aeronautical engineer. That was his words. Not I'm going to build airplanes. It was I'm going to be an aeronautical engineer.
And then at 12, Brian made another major announcement.
I had a great interest in aircraft and flying, and I wanted to serve my country later down the road, and the best way for me to accomplish that is to probably go to the Air Force Academy.
And 7 years later, he was there, a member of one of the most elite flying squads in the world. And then, during his senior year, while working toward his pilot's license, all his hopes and dreams were destroyed.
And I was studying, and I just had a hard time concentrating. And at the same time, I started feeling ill. It felt like some kind of stomach virus.
Brian kept hoping the pain would go away, but it only got worse.
I started becoming a little bit more suspicious. Like, okay, it's not just a stomach virus. There's got to be something going on.
Hey, Brian.
And so, finally, he paid a visit to the base doctor, Major Bill Gibson.
Thought it was just acute gastroenteritis. And what happened was Brian continued to have abdominal pain and kept coming back and had weight loss and fevers.
Tell me something. This is a little more tender?
Yeah.
Right
All
here.
the symptoms pointed toward appendicitis. And so, in October 1995, Brian had his appendix removed. But what the doctor found was not what he expected. Brian's appendix was a completely healthy organ. And so the mystery continued. And then a series of tests and blood work finally revealed the true cause of his pain. Brian had a rare form of leukemia.
Just sit down here so we can have a little talk.
I'm now breaking news to him that he has a disease which is potentially very fatal.
You have a form of cancer. It's quite serious, and it can be very dangerous.
His dreams of being an Air Force pilot and holding these degrees and doing all these other things have just been radically altered.
Brian contacted his parents and gave them the bad news.
Hello.
He was shook. His voice was trembling.
Is there some other test to make sure?
Never heard that from him ever before. My mind was racing. The words leukemia just rolling over and over again in my head. Kind of saw some dreams of not only Brian's but ours starting to vanish.
The Baumans left immediately for the Air Force Academy to be with their son.
Brian? It's Mom.
Brian, how are you doing?
He doesn't look good.
Brian was sleeping, maybe 18 to 20 hours a day and gotten very thin. It was really frightening for me because he'd always been so full of energy. So this was really, it was hard to watch.
That afternoon, the Baumans met with Dr. Gibson at the cadet clinic.
So what can we do, Doctor?
Dr. Gibson told the Baumans that the only hope for their son was a bone marrow transplant.
Biological match.
We knew the best chance for his success was a biological match, donor.
Sister, brother, with that? The
Certainly.
family? Okay.
Absolutely.
But there was a major obstacle in the way.
We knew if we didn't find a donor within the first year, Brian would die. We also knew that We had absolutely no information of his Korean family.
And so the Baumans began a desperate search. They started with the agency that had set up the adoption. And a representative was immediately sent to Korea to check records there.
When children are put up for adoption, that's not considered a good thing in Korea, and it's sort of a shame, and you don't want to be known to be involved with that.
We knew that the information that was in the files could be completely false. We knew that the mothers could give false names or no names.
What they did have was Brian's birth name, Kim Sung-duk. But while the Korean records were available, they proved to be a dead end, with no real leads to the mother's identity. Back in Minnesota, the news was a devastating blow for the Bauman family.
We know you've already started to work. We can see your work. We just want to thank you for what you've done already. Amen.
Amen. You'll be okay, Mom. It's gonna be all fine.
We knew that we had to do something. We had to stay active in this thing.
State Bauman for Linda Oransky.
And so, with time running out,
right.
Mr. Bauman tried to locate a racially compatible donor in Korea, but the odds were overwhelming.
From what we understood, there was like 1,700 Koreans on the marrow donor program. Now, how does that compare? Well, the chances of matching is about 1 in 200,000. It was not good news.
With his condition deteriorating rapidly and little hope in finding a relative or donor, only a miracle could save Brian Bauman's life. The amazing conclusion, when it's a miracle, continues.
It's a miracle.
Sometimes when a person holds out their hand to another in a time of need, the gesture can be so profound that it seems miraculous. But when an entire nation becomes involved in the plight of a single individual, it's more than just miraculous. It's a testament to man's basic goodness and the amazing powers that we as human beings possess. And now, the conclusion to the remarkable story of Brian Sung-duk Bauman. From the time he was a young boy, Brian Bauman wanted to be a pilot. But in his senior year in the U.S. Air Force Academy, he was struck down with a rare form of leukemia. Brian's only hope, a biologically compatible bone marrow donor, preferably a relative. But Brian was a Korean orphan, adopted by Americans, and 18 years later there was no record of his biological family. The situation seemed hopeless. Now his family could only wait and pray that someone or something would save Brian's life.
We've already started to work.
And then a Korean newspaper published an article on the Bauman family's race to find a donor, and Brian's story soon spread throughout Korea. Brian Bauman had begun to capture the hearts of the Korean public, and telethons and television specials joined in the search to find a donor to save this courageous young man's life.
That was the start of something unbelievable.
There was a tremendous outpouring of concern, and suddenly thousands of Koreans were registering as potential donors, something that their tradition had always forbidden. But the odds of finding a match were 1 in 200,000. Back in the United States, while the Baumans waited for news from Korea, Brian's condition took a turn for the worse.
The doctors thought Brian might be going through what was referred to as a blast crisis, a sudden acceleration of the leukemia.
But something was about to occur that would give the Baumans a new sense of hope. A family in Korea recognized 3-year-old Brian from an old photograph.
여기는 제 동생이고요.
They remembered that he had a half-sister named Soon-mi.
동생이 같이 있었어요.
Now at last, the Baumans may have found a biologically compatible donor. A few weeks later, the entire Bauman family was on hand to meet her as she arrived from Korea.
How do you greet a Korean? What the book said was, well, you bow, you don't show the top of your head, you don't shake their hands.
So nice of you to come.
Obviously, you don't hug or anything like that. Well, they came up the walkway and threw their arms around, just hugs and kisses. It was like, take that book and throw it away.
But their happiness was to be short-lived. The next day, bone marrow and blood tests came back negative.
I had to go and explain to Brian and his family and the sister that even though she had made this heroic trip over here, that she wasn't a match. All that work had been for nothing.
You could hear a pin drop. It was so quiet. Our hearts just absolutely sank.
Hello.
But Brian's
Yes, it is.
family refused to give up hope, and his father continued to tirelessly search for a donor.
Thank you.
And then the miracle they'd been praying for occurred. A donor had been found, a Korean army sergeant.
We had heard he was a pretty good match, so they were going to redo the testing. It turned out that he was a very good match.
Brian was rushed to the Seattle Veterans Hospital in Washington, where he underwent chemotherapy before the new bone marrow was transplanted into his body. Now there was nothing left to do but wait.
Oh, it was horrible. And knowing that you had no control, couldn't help him.
But the operation was successful, and Brian slowly gained back his strength and his life.
Oh, you're tough. You really are. Such a fighter, such a fighter.
And 1 year later, his lifelong dream came true.
I was able to finally graduate from Air Force Academy, and that was one of the happiest days of my life, to finish and complete getting that diploma.
A few months later, Brian returned to Korea for the first time in 21 years to meet the man who had saved his life.
I wanted to thank him on behalf of myself and my family. There's nothing better I could do, just say thanks for saving my life.
And so two men, an Air Force cadet and an Army soldier, strangers from halfway around the world, were able to share a moment of true brotherly love.
Reflecting back on having cancer, I feel like there's other people out there who will help their fellow man. They're out there and people care what's going on. I definitely feel like it was a miracle just because the odds were not in my favor to find a donor. The odds were not in my favor to recover as well as I did and be able to continue on with my life. My family members think it's a miracle. My friends think it's a miracle. I think my life has been charmed.